Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with Jenny Groberg. How are you doing, Jenny?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good, good. We're glad to have you here on the show. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background before we begin.
Yeah, you bet. I'm a mom of five. I've been married for 21 years. Um, my husband decided to go to medical school when we were first married. And because of that and residency and the low pay, I had to start a business. I had to do something, and nobody would hire me from home, which is really what I needed because I had three kids at the time. And so I started doing consulting work and built a business. And we're servicing hundreds of clients across the US, and I'm only employing women who can work from home. So that's fun because I can tap into a really highly educated workforce that wouldn't otherwise be in employment. And yeah, we're really we're breaking a lot of barriers for women, and we're changing the mindset that, finance is kind of this stuffy place that only men are players in. So it's been really fun.
I'm not sure if you're going to change the stuffiness of it, but yes, the male part maybe. Well, cool. So why did you choose the women angle? Like what's unique about, women in finance and accounting that you're so passionate about?
I think it was just because I had no employment options. Um, I went and interviewed at a restaurant in Park City, Utah, and I saw an ad for accounting work, and I was hoping that they would take a chance on me. I had been a CFO, and then when we went to med school, I was a remote CFO. So I knew that model was possible, but nobody would hire a mom with three kids, and it was really essential and kind of catastrophic, our financial situation, and I needed to work. So I am so grateful that I was able to get some, business, doing some contractor work. And then, when I meet with clients, they would just say, Jenny, you're so much faster than I am. It just makes more sense for you to do this, more fast and efficient. And then ever since then, it was just, this is something that women need. Um, Especially, always, but right now, costs are so high and inflation is so high that so many people, so many women are trying to re-enter the workforce. Wall Street Journal reached out and asked what my take was on women re-entering the workforce. They were, kind of trying to decide, is this because employers are making work more accessible, or is it because women are being forced to because prices are so high? And my feeling is that prices are so high and families are struggling so much that they have to find employment. They have to do something, and they're re-entering the workforce because of that. So I'm passionate about it. We have a staff of about 30 women, and they live across the US, and we're killing it. We're doing really well.
Nice. Nice. I've always found the concept of women in the workforce to be fascinating when it comes from like a cultural and economic standpoint. Like if you think back in, was it like the 70s or 60s when women didn't work generally? It was a much smaller percentage of the workforce. And once they started working, all of a sudden all the prices got driven up because there's, people are making more money. But now you don't have the choice because everything's more expensive.
Right.
Um, and having gone through it myself with my wife, having kids and the choice, and we talk about this all the time of, you're making a choice between being a mom or being a professional, and you have to leave one behind. It's really hard to do both. Like what do you see when you're working with women? Because you're talking about people working from home and probably are moms and, and what, how, how can women handle that challenge of trying to choose between your family and your professional life?
You know, Working with women, people question, can you do this? Can you work with five kids? And the women can do everything. Women can multitask, women can juggle a million balls in the air. I think it's absolutely possible. I've always worked just because I want to, because I thrive when I'm productive and when I'm busy. And It is challenging though. I had a reporter from US News and World Report say, Jenny, this just looks like mom nirvana. Like you've tapped into this workforce, you're all women, it's so great. You're helping them, but like, what's the real story? What does this actually look like? Because that can't be the case. And it's not. I am employing the most challenging demographic possible. They're women, so they are balancing their children, they're balancing parents and aging parents. They are balancing, hormones and babies and postpartum. I always have one of my women on maternity or someone's always pregnant. And that's challenging. It's expensive. I have organized our staff into teams. And depending on the needs of the clients, we have a different team for each client. And there's cross training and there's backups. There's usually at least three on each account. And that way, if somebody does have a baby or somebody, needs a leave of some sort, then there are other people that can step in and help them. So is it difficult? Absolutely. The other thing that's challenging about it is we're all remote. So, usually when you're working with somebody, you can see if they're not okay, or you can see if they're max or if they're late, or there's certain markers. And the same is true with remote work. You can kind of sense when things are getting dropped or whatever. And we're hoping and we're constantly shifting things to try to support them as best as we can and allow them that space that they can step back or they can take care of other things. We also have a cap on their hours. How many hours are you able to work? Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 30, and we don't go beyond that. So, if you do have kids or you have other obligations, the hope is that you can still work, you can still contribute, you can still make money, but it's a lot more flexible than probably a lot of other jobs.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, with COVID happening, everyone's kind of more comfortable with being remote, which is good and bad. I just saw a LinkedIn post of four guys walking down the street with like business attire from the waist up, and they had like shorts on, like in the bottom, and like like sandals, and
Awesome.
it was just hilarious. Like some of the stuff out there is funny, but that's what it is. And the title was like, I'm getting ready for work.
True.
Um, but yeah, I mean, so all right, so it's great that you're working with women and helping them and giving that opportunity. I know the accounting space right now is really weird. It's shrinking rapidly, and there are a lot of accountants who aren't even taking on new clients right now. Many of them have just said, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm full. Like I'm not taking on new clients," and they're getting pestered every day by people to like take more work. It's a nice problem to have, but
Yeah.
the accounting field is shrinking. So, where do you see opportunities in the field? Because I know you work with a lot of business owners and what have you.
So where do I see opportunity? Man, opportunity is everywhere. Um, I just went to DC with the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce and the different needs from banks, wanting me to possibly teach their small business. WaFd Bank saying, "Hey Jenny, maybe you can help teach our small business owners how to keep better track of their finances." And you asked me about personal investing earlier, but if businesses are successful, then people have more money in their pocket and then they're able to invest more, right? And it's not really an issue of growth, growth, growth. It's an issue of profits, profits, profits. And everybody needs more profit. Growth is one thing, but if you're growing and your expenses are matching that, then you're not going to be as profitable and have as much money. So I see a lot of opportunity. Our staff, we have data entry and bookkeepers, and we have CPAs. So I know, like you said, the CPAs, there's fewer and further between because people don't want to invest that much in getting those certifications. So hopefully we can continue to just grow and find other ways to meet the demands of people. But, we're doing that by trying to pad and trying to get as many accountants and data entry as we can, and then have the CPAs double check and hopefully kind of streamline that workload so it's not as burdensome.
Nice. So, I know you mentioned before that you had basically paid off your student loans in like a really short period of time. So maybe you can kind of talk about that because I know, a lot of people have been to college, they have student loans, and while the government's talking about paying back student loans and paying them off, even that's just basically a stump speech for getting elected, pretty much. But, assuming they don't do that to the extent that they say they want to do it, how can people pay off their student loans as quickly? I mean, that's a lot of money in a very short period of time.
Yeah, so when we were residents, we had $250,000 of student loans between me and my husband. We were on our own for our education, which I think is a good thing. I see a lot of parents saying, should I take out loans for my kids? Should I pay for that? But if you do a parent student loan, you're in the highest tier of interest. And that's not your responsibility. I think that the kids and the students should be taking on that debt. So, what is the economic impact of student loans? We as a country have $1.7 trillion of student debt. It's so much money. The average American has 30,000 in personal student loans. And as a household, the average is about 55,000. So, if you have $30,000 of student loans and you pay it off over 10 years, which is the standard repayment, you're paying roughly $350 a month if you're paying about 6.8% interest, which that's about average between 6 and 9%. So, people just think, this is a long-term plan. It's my student loans, it's fine. I'm just gonna, carry that on. Even my brother went to law school. And he said, Jenny, I was thinking Biden was literally going to pay off my student loans. So, I'm guilty of that. I stopped paying on them, hoping that that would happen. And I'm still saddled with it. And so I think everybody thinks, that their other backup plan is the plan. And that's not the correct way of thinking. And if you can actually say, okay, I'm going to pay off these student loans, what does that look like? The payment on 30,000 over 10 years is about $350 a month. And if you were to pay an extra $100 a month towards those student loans, then you would pay them off in 7 years. And instead of paying 11,000 in interest, it would cut it back to 7. And then let's say you found another 100 in your budget. So you're making an extra $200 payment a month. Then you've now cut you've paid, your payoff is now 5 years. And then the interest is going to be closer to 5,000. So you have to get that into that mentality of this is possible. We had $250,000 of student loans. I think my husband's salary as a resident was 45,000 gross. I was probably making 20 grand with my side hustle, 20 grand a year. And that was also gross. And you look at that and think, man, you're never going to make any headway. And then he graduates and gets a better job. And then I start making more money. But we continue living at that income level. And our family size at this point is 5. And then it grows to 7. We just refused. He worked with a doctor, and the doctor said, I've been working for 15 years and I've just now paid down what I initially borrowed. So he was on the 30-year plan and he was going to pay double, what he needed. And I told my husband, I said, we are not doing that. So we continue living on that income, probably $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And we didn't go on more expensive vacations. We continued camping or doing family reunions. We didn't eat out at more expensive places. I didn't buy nicer or more clothes. I didn't furnish my home. I think that's the mentality is I get out of school, cool. I can get rid of my crappy car. I can finally buy furniture that's not used in hand-me-downs from family. And I'm morally opposed to that. I saw so many of our fellow students and classmates get out of school, buy an SUV, buy a house, furnish the house on credit cards. And so anything in excess that we made, we threw at our student loans. And I didn't think it would go as quickly. I really didn't. I thought we'd be saddled with those loans for a really long time, but we paid them off in 2 years.
Nice.
And then the amount of interest that you save is so huge. And then we're debt free and we can turn around and then we can actually buy a car and then we can buy furniture and not do that on credit. And the economic impact that has is huge. Student loan debt is similar to a recession in that it reduces spending, it stifles the housing market. People aren't investing it. It inhibits business growth. Instead, if you take that money and that interest that you've been paying towards debt, and then you're investing more in your 401k or you're investing in properties or all these other things, then the economy is really going to flourish. But there's just so much debt and people are really limited by that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, as a country, from the government side, the debt is just skyrocketing, and the household level, it certainly continues to rise. And that trend's been going on for a long time. And I
Right.
don't know where the peak is, but you're right. You're basically pulling forward future income into today,
Right.
right? So you're spending like you're making 100,000, but you're actually making 80,000. And
Yeah,
at some
yeah,
point, you can't do that.
you're spending and you're also inhibiting your own growth. And people don't look at it that way. They just think, oh, it's fine. I have the student loan. But the student loans are going to affect your debt to income ratio. They're going to affect your ability to buy a house or get an auto loan or whatever you need. That does factor, even if you have good credit, it affects your debt to income ratio. So, and it just limits your opportunities. Then if you're actually investing in that, or let's say you put it in a short-term savings account, those are paying between 4 and 5% in some institutions. And if you can actually be utilizing that instead of paying 10% in student loans or 6 to 9%, it's a huge swing. It's 6 to 9% interest rates versus 5 to 10% in the market. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it's assuming you're getting those rates. I know a lot of banks are still
Right.
paying zero, and they're getting away with it
Well,
because people
banks
aren't
are,
paying
but if
attention.
if you look at like American Express savings accounts, those are paying high 4%. My bank's paying 0.03% or something crazy like that. And I have no incentive to put it there. So if I need my short-term savings or my emergency fund, yeah, I'm totally going to put that into a high yield savings account that I can be making 4% on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to earn more than people are making. I think one of the challenges I've seen is just people just don't pay attention. Like,
It's
why
true.
do you have $100,000 earning 0% in
Right.
Bank of X when
Right.
you could buy treasuries for 5.5% or high yield savings for,
Right.
similar amount? Like you've got a lot of options, but people don't think that that hey, this is really important. To me it just boggles my mind. But
And they just don't know. I think that's the bottom line. I mean, the bottom line is 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck.
yeah,
That's so scary. And so maybe 20% of Americans have extra cash. Do they have the financial literacy to know that that's available? All of my friends are like, Jenny, we have no idea that's available. So I think it's good that you're bringing awareness to personal financial literacy because I think a lot of people don't know these things.
yeah, no, I agree. So how should what are some, I don't know if you have some frameworks or how people should be thinking about personal finance that maybe that can help people think about things in a better way?
I mean, number one would be to get out of debt and to have this mentality of it will inhibit your financial freedom instead of, oh, it's fine that I have this auto loan. It's fine that I have a mortgage payment. You know, so many Americans, I think 50% of Americans are forced into retirement early. My dad is one of those. My mom got metastatic breast cancer. Her breast cancer came back, and he was forced into retirement to take care of her. Fortunately, he had savings. He had a retirement, all these things. And those are the day-to-day things that you think won't make a difference. You think it won't be that big of a deal to spend a couple extra $100 towards your student loans. It matters and it speeds up your financial freedom. So by doing that, by getting out of debt, we did that. We paid off our student loans and then we had a car loan. We got that paid off. And then once we had that done, then we're like, okay, we're investing in retirement. And then our income keeps growing. So then, we again reaffirm our commitment to each other. And it is a joint agreement and a joint venture and partnership with your spouse or your partner that you're going to stay out of debt. And
Yeah.
then you have more opportunities to do X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden we're looking at college and we can pay for college and that's fine. for our kids. And we could help my parents if we needed to. But I'm really grateful that we decided early on to get out of debt and stay out of debt. And it's completely changed the trajectory of our household.
Nice. So let me ask you a quick question on business owners, and I know you work with a lot of business owners. What are some frameworks that they can look at when trying to apply some of this to their business? Because there's, business running a business is complicated, as you know, and there's a lot of the financials. I guess most people are not financial people, so it just gets get really confusing. So what are some things that business owners can look for to help save money on their business, or how should they be thinking about
That's a
some of
good
these financials?
question. So it parallels personal finance quite closely. So, you need a budget. Personally, we lived on a budget. We used the app Good Budget, and it's kind of like an envelope system. And my husband and I would log everything that we would spend. And as long as you've got a target, you're not always going to be spot on, but having a target helps you at least be pretty close. And the same is true with businesses. You have a target on what you want your revenue to be, and you have to pay attention to that. You have to pay attention to your expenses. What's happening with my payroll? Is my income climbing, but my payroll is climbing more quickly? If so, then you need to raise your prices or do something different. But at the end of the day, you have to be looking at your financials. So, with my accounting firm, we help businesses keep an eye on that. And then you got to make sure that you're profitable. You got to make sure that you're budgeting and keeping track um, month after month after month. If a business owner kind of ignores it, or let's say a bigger business, you need to be looking at it daily or weekly. And if you can be paying close enough attention, then you can pivot and make better decisions. Um, I have one business owner that we've noticed she's paying employees through Venmo. And that's going to be catastrophic because she's not paying the right payroll taxes. And then you can't actually see on her financials, is she spending too much on payroll? Um, Another business owner is not caught up with sales tax. Just like personally, if you're not keeping up with your taxes, you're going to go out of business. So it's important that you look at your financials, whether it's personal or business, that you're tracking it and making sure that you're making decisions based on that. When I first started my business, I was really stressed to bring on my first employee. And I remember thinking, okay, I need to have 3 months of her salary in my bank account before I hire her because it was on me. I was worried, maybe I wouldn't have the money to pay her. And so I put that in savings and then I brought her on. I think it's important to be conservative. The same is true with your personal finances. Make sure you have enough savings to cover yourself for at least 3 months of your family's or household expenses. And then if prices change or interest rates change, then you're prepared for it. Something that I'm seeing with business owners that's going to be pretty scary right now is that a lot of loans have been put on a 5-year arm. So it could be equipment, it could be buildings. And business owners think, in 5 years, I'll be making more, I'll be doing better. A 5-year arm is no problem. And for those listening that don't know what a 5-year arm means, it's this carrot that's dangled in front of you saying, yes, we'll loan you money for this piece of equipment. The interest rate might be 4% or 5% now. And, in 5 years, it will adjust to whatever the current interest rate is. And so they think, oh, yeah, that's fine. I'll do that because you get a little bit better rate now. But the problem is that 5 years, we're approaching that. And I talked with a guy who's been asked to come back from retirement to help the feds assess the bank's risk because we have maybe in the next year these interest rates readjusting or adjusting on that arm, and the payment for these loans is going to quadruple and essentially. So, you might be at 5% and maybe your payments, 2000. Well, when that adjusts, you're hosed and it's going to be really hard for these business owners to be able to make those payments. So I don't even know that every business owner is even aware of keeping track. Oh yeah, I have an arm. I'm sure they take out the loan and they're paying it and it's not even a thought. So that's something that scares me a little bit that I see a lot of small businesses facing, and then I share those adjusting arms. especially with interest rates where they're at right now.
So what can people do given that problem? What can people do to address it now before it becomes a bigger
So
problem?
So you look at it and say, do I actually need this equipment? Could I downsize and get into a smaller building or a smaller space? Could I maybe sell some equipment now? You have to be thinking ahead of the play. So have the long term again in mind and be aware this could be catastrophic. And those arms could put businesses out of business. So I think you just have to say, what can I afford? Maybe you need to start setting aside extra savings right now to prepare for that. Maybe you need to go to your banks right now and say, okay, can we reassess this loan and be ahead of the game? Instead of having the banks default on you or you default on the banks, I guess, and then you're trying to catch up. It's going to really affect your credit and all banks, your business has a credit score. Your EIN is tied to your credit, but they also are tied to you personally. So if you default or you're late on some of these payments, it will affect you personally. So you really need to make sure that you're prepared. So I'd say go talk to your banks and shop around, see if there's other options. And if there's not, then look and see, do I really need this equipment or can I dump it and buy something used or a better deal or whatever, or cash flow it?
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, Jenny, I really appreciate you coming to the show, sharing your wisdom with us. Where can people find more about you?
So we're on Instagram. The handle's at BooksmartsPro, plural, BooksmartsPro. So at BooksmartsPro, our website is booksmartspro.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn at Jenny Groberg, and we're also on LinkedIn for Booksmarts. So yeah,
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jenny, for coming to the show. Appreciate your wisdom, and yeah, we'll be chatting with you soon.
awesome. Thanks so much.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room.
All right. Well, that was a great interview with Jenny. Really appreciate her coming to the show, sharing her story with us. Now we're into the panel portion of the show where you have our very own Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey Kirk, how are you today? Happy to be here.
Doing great. Doing great. I'm just happy I'm not in Florida right now with all the hurricanes going on.
Yeah.
We also have our very own Barb Freeberg. Hey, Barb.
Hi, happy to be here. Looking forward to bouncing off of Jenny's ideas. She brought up a lot of topics that I think we're all interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive right in. So Phil, what were some of your takeaways from the interview?
there were a few things that hit home for me. Her story about women with kids and working from home. I mean, my wife went through that when we had our second child and her company shut down. So that really hit home. And she did find something to do, but then when she wants to get back in the workforce, it was even worse because she didn't have, when I started my business, she didn't have any medical coverage. And now she's a CPA, but she's doing work that's really below what she's capable of just because that time got disregarded. So getting into the right situation also matters. But Jenny also brought up a whole lot of points about personal finance that I thought were really good. Her story about repaying the student loans, the idea about how so many people still have money in the bank that's paying almost no interest. That was good. She talked about the idea of budgeting and things to think about if you have a business when you start to have employees, or just a whole host of issues that she brought up that I thought were so relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you? What about you, Barb? What were some of the things that you found interesting?
The lifestyle and the budgeting and the debt is really key front and center to me because I think so many people think debt is required and debt is a part of life. And what interest rate am I going to get? You know, the key is you don't have to have debt, or if you do have debt, you can pay it off and you can pay it off aggressively. And there are trade-offs. And I loved when she talked about, we paid off our student loan debt in 2 years. Her husband is a doctor, he had $250,000 in debt. And many people are going to say that's impossible, but on the other hand, you make a choice every time you let your lifestyle creep up, every time you go out to dinner, every time you buy a car or rent an apartment or buy a house. How are you going to choose to live? And although you may not have everything you want, but if you make the choice to pay off debt first, your life's going to be so much smoother in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comment. I mean, we talk about debt. I mean, it's this hidden tax on everybody, and it starts when you're in college, and the credit card companies get in there and they bait people into getting credit cards so they can start spending tomorrow's income today. And then, of course, you've got college debt, which is ridiculous. I was just talking to a professor actually yesterday. Um, and he was talking about the absurdity of college, and at some point it's all going to implode because people just can't afford it. And it's just you're basically allowed to pay for one big 4-year party, and you have to pay for it the rest of your life. And assuming that you're going to make enough money to pay it back, because some people won't, and then they get in real trouble. And now you got this debt shackle for the rest of your life, and it's a real problem for most people. If you're wealthy enough, it's fine, but most people in the country aren't. And hey, I don't send my kid to college, I'm a bad parent. So you got to send your kid to college. And all this stuff wrapped up in the FOMO and all of it. And all this for something that uh, in the conversation kind of tilted yesterday. We were talking about AI, and I said, well, my whole struggle is my kid's going to college in 5 years, let's say, 4 or 5 years. And then I got another one right after that. Is college even going to be necessary with AI and all the new changes? Like, what's the point of college? I mean, the way it used to be, it's going to change dramatically, and I don't know what's going to cause it, but it's going to be rapidly different. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts, Phil, on all this? I mean, college itself is obviously a big topic, but how should people look at like the biggest purchase they make in their entire life?
It's so tough, and it's something that comes up with clients a lot because we all say, so many people say, my child can go to whatever college they want to go to, but they don't realize how much it's going to cost, and they haven't done a good job of saving for it. I have one client that they have one child, and we had the conversations when we're working on their financial plan about where she's going to go to school. Like, oh, she can go to school anywhere she wants. It's fine. Well, she ended up picking a school that was over $90,000 a year. And then so Phil, how are we going to pay for this? We talked about it in their plan, but it was more than we had in the plan. And so Jenny talked about the Parent Plus loans. I mean, those are an option, but they're a higher interest rate than the conventional student loans. Fortunately, it ended up that one of the parents was in position to help them pay for it. But it's really hard because it's become where you're supposed to go to college. There are things that you can do. You can become an electrician. You can become a carpenter. Those are good professions that pay a good income, and you don't need a college education to do those. You go to a trade school, which costs a lot less, and if that's for you, that's what you do. But we think that everybody's supposed to go to college, and the costs have gone up so much. I mean, I think about when I went to college, it was $10,000 a year, and I went to Duke. It was $10,000 a year. Now that's a $90,000 school too. It's like the cost of college has well outstripped inflation or anything else over the years, but our savings haven't caught up with it. And if you look around your college, like it's not like they're letting more people in. Where's that money going? It's going to put new buildings out there and to make the school look prettier so they can attract more people. It's not really going into the education that the kids are getting. I mean, you go to a good school, you get a good education. I'm not denying that, but the costs just don't justify what's happened. They've put there's so much more administration and everything else in these schools, and that's what we're paying for. We're not paying for more kids to go. We're not paying for a better education. So the system's gotten out of control to a large extent because there's no restraint on how much a school can increase the cost of tuition. And it's a huge cost. And still, I talk about it with clients, and I've had clients come to me with lots of student debt, and it's hard too because what are you going to do? Right? My daughter's a freshman, and her roommate may be leaving after this year because the major that she had, like I wouldn't have let my child go to school with that major. And now thinks she doesn't even want to do that. She's going to do something different, which makes more sense. And she wouldn't have to be in college to do it. But we get this idea that we have to go to college without thinking about what's your return. Like if you're going to go and get a profession, like if you're going to go to college to become a doctor, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you need that education and you have to get it, maybe not at the most expensive school, but you have to get a college education to do it. But there's plenty of things that you don't, or if you want to be, I don't want to pick on anybody, right? But if you're an English major, if you're a history major, you can get jobs doing those, but not to equate the cost of a good college. So if you're going to do something like that, think about what you want to do so that you make sure that the pay that you're going to get is going to put you in position to repay. That's a big thing. You get these big debts and then you don't earn enough to repay them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a tough topic for sure. What are your thoughts, Barb?
I keep thinking about how things are so different today than they were, 20, 40, 60 years ago. And it's a whole different world where you can get the education you need online. You can start out at a community college, which is much less expensive, and then finish up online or finish up at a more expensive school. Or there's so many certificate programs that are linked to really good jobs, like cybersecurity is one of the top jobs, top paying jobs, top high demand jobs. And you can get a certificate in cybersecurity from a very well regarded institution online for pennies on the dollar of what you'd pay for a college education. And I know a lot of people talk about, oh, the experience, whatever, you're off on your own, whatever. I don't know. Is it worth, 50, 60, $70,000 a year? You're gonna grow up anyhow. Do you need to have a college experience and put yourself in lifetime debt in order to do that? So really, college is a whole different choice, a whole different decision today, and can have lifetime financial impact on both the parents and the children.
Yeah. It's such a hard thing because if you look at it, I equate going to college like buying a house. When you buy a house, there's a logical element to it. Am I going to pay X? What is the value of what I'm paying? And then there's an emotional side, right? So right now, at least in this part of the country, I haven't researched the whole country, but at least in the Boston area, if you buy a house over 800,000, it is cheaper to rent than it is to own it. And the more expensive the house, the cheaper it is to rent because the rent doesn't go up commensurately and the price of the house does. So it's much cheaper to rent than to own. In some cases, 3 to 1. It's 3 to 1 more expensive in buying than renting. So it kind of puts in this thing of like, why buy? And obviously there's an emotional element to it. So logically, anything over 800,000 makes sense to rent because mathematically the numbers add up that way. If it's below 800,000, it makes sense to buy because mathematically it's in their favor. But yet wealthy people don't rent homes, they buy homes because they have money. And it gets into this realm of the logic goes out the window and it's an emotional decision, which is important to note, right? All big purchases have an emotional attachment to it. I like this cherry tree in the backyard and that's why I want the home. Now, logically, that's really stupid, but emotionally, it's really important. It could be, right? Or I like how we're, next to the woods or something that has nothing to do with logic. It has to do with emotion and emotional attachment, and that's important. However, it is an aspect of this that can be contradictory, right? You could say, well, financially, it makes sense to buy this beaten down house and we can renovate it. And you might say, yeah, but I don't want to renovate a house. I want a house that's already prepackaged and it's perfect. So it's obviously a part of the decision. If you look at college, it's the same way. Logically, well, what we should do is send our kid to community college for 2 years, then have them apply to a really good school, and they get a graduate degree from that good school, and then we're good, right? We've just saved a huge amount of money in college, and or send them their senior year and save a huge amount of money in college, and they're good to go. Well, logically, that makes sense. Do people want to do it? Absolutely not. Because emotionally, I want my kid to have that experience, which is part of it. Or I don't want to have the stigma of having my kid go to community college. I want my kid to go to Harvard or Duke or MIT or wherever the heck they want to send him. It's FOMO, right? It's in part it's FOMO and in part it's a social norm of you want to be seen as a good parent or your kid is really smart, right? All those people who have a bumper sticker. My kid is an honor roll student at this public school. Who cares? Like, hey, great, your kid's an honor roll student. Who cares? Like nowadays, everyone's an honor roll student. Lake Wabagon, everyone's above average, right? But the point is people want that. That's important to them. And I'm not discounting it, right? I'm making fun of people, but obviously some people have that. And I'm not discounting it because some people it's important. But the reality is it really important? It's important to you. Is important to the kid? Is important to their future? I don't know. Logically, mathematically, it doesn't. There's a negative ROI in college right now. Whatever money you're spending in college, you're not going to make that back in increased salary. That's the truth. People have done studies on it. You have a negative ROI in the cost of college. So why are you spending so much? FOMO, right? And it's emotion. It's not logic, it's emotion. So all of these big decisions are really important to make. And we don't have a good decision-making process, at least in this country, of we're more tied up into the social stigma and the social norms and what's important socially, and less tied into the, hey, I need to, I don't want to spend more than 20,000 on my kid's college because that will equate to a good return on my investment, as opposed to anyway. So all of these things are important, but let's get back to you, Phil. So to paying down debt, I mean, obviously college, I mean, I just talked to somebody today, like BU's like 90,000 a year. I think there's one college that's teetering on 100,000. Some colleges are more. If you're a national student, you might be paying 130,000, especially like BU. But that's a lot of money. And if you have it, that's fine. But people go into debt. How should people be looking at debt if they or if they've already taken the plunge and said, I don't care, I'm making a bad financial decision, I'm going to spend it anyway. What do people do in paying down debt?
So it depends. I mean, I have one client that they came to me between the two, they had that $250,000 to $300,000 worth of debt. One thing that she was able to do is she got a job working for a not-for-profit institution. So she gets to take advantage of the public loan student forgiveness program. So as long as she continues working for a not-for-profit for 10 years, she has to make payments along the way, but eventually the rest of her debt will be wiped out. So that's one way, but that's not something everybody can do. When I look at debt, I mean, when I graduated college, I had student loan debt, I had credit card debt because that's part of how I put myself through school. And so that meant to me kind of like what Jenny talked about, the idea that I put together a plan to repay my debt. I looked at it and I like to pick the method that says, let's take the highest interest rate first, pay that one off, then attack the next, and all the way down the line till it's gone. Because to me, that was going to save me the most money. There's other people that need that sense of accomplishment. And so they'll start with the smallest balance and pay that off and work their way that way. Either one works. But the key thing is you have to be willing to set a plan up. And that means some austerity too, right? Because you're going to not have some other expenses. Maybe you don't take the same trips. There's some other things you have to decide. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put off my car, buying another car for a while, those type of things so that you can control expenses and make the majority of your money go towards paying that down that debt. Because when it's gone, it's a burden that's goes away. It's a burden mentally, right? Because you know that it's there and it affects you. But it's also a burden because it inhibits your ability to do other things. Because if you don't stop, you're just going to keep adding more and more and more. So it's important that you identify, hey, I have this issue. Here's how I'm going to attack it. Let's put a plan together. Let's do it. And let's make sure that it goes away. Because even we talk about mortgages. When you have a low rate mortgage, if you refinance during COVID and you're paying those under 3% mortgages, like that's kind of good debt, right? Because it's not that expensive. I could put the money into a CD or a treasury and get more than that. But even still, that interest does add up. If you get a 6 or 7% interest rate mortgage, like in the current market, you're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest over the life of a 30-year loan. So that's a lot of money that you're giving away. So even though sometimes the interest rate sounds low, just make sure you understand, like have a software, some type of application, so you can understand what you're really paying, because that's what we don't realize sometimes, how much we're really paying. If you have that credit card that's got 18, 21, 24% debt, whatever those higher rate credit cards are paying, that's a lot of money. And if you just make the minimum payment, you'll never pay it off. It'll be there forever. And that means every time, I had a client, had credit card debt. And he was saying, oh, well, I went to this, I got this card because they gave me a discount on gas. But then he had a balance on it. It was outstanding. You're not getting any discount on gas because you're paying interest on this that's way more than that. So you have to think about what the consequences are and make sure that you can, don't bite off more than you can chew. Pay off those credit cards every month. Don't carry an outstanding balance. If you have it, put in a plan to make it go away.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Barb, what about you? What are some of your thoughts? How should people be thinking about their debt?
I always compare it to the return you can expect on your money if you had it in a diversified US global stock fund. So that's a benchmark that you can use to assume that over the long term, you'll get 8, 9% annualized compounded return if you're investing in the stock market. Not for a year or two, but for 10, 20, 30 years for retirement. And that's our goal when we're working. Our goal is to earn our money during our working years, but to spread it out over our entire lives so that our 50 years working, 40 years working actually lasts us until we die. And so that's why investing is super important. But if you have credit card debt of 20%, and you're invested in the stock market and you're earning 9%, you're actually losing 11% a year. So this is a psychological issue as well as a money issue. But it's, I'd say, at least as significant a psychological issue because you have to make a decision. Do you want your life more luxurious today? Or do you want a relatively sustainable, consistent, strong financial life today and tomorrow? Do you want to be living totally on Social Security? I know that would be a real problem for me and for my husband. So the trade-offs you have to make today is you have to ask yourself how important it is to carry that debt and recognize you have a choice. And that's really hard if you were brought up with the idea of everyone has debt. We all have a lot of credit card debt, and I was just talking to a really good friend and she's like, yeah, I'm getting a new car. Do you think I should wait because the interest rates are going down? And I'm like, well, yeah, you should wait because the interest rates are going down. But what I didn't say to my friend is you also might think about, saving up as much as you can so you can get a really small loan, car loan, a really short-term car loan, and pay it off as fast as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, all these are really important decisions, and we talked about in the interview about kind of personal finance, and we talked about this a little bit before the show. Um, but there's a lot of middle class people are getting squeezed, right? Because the poor people are poor, the rich people are rich, and that's probably not going to change all that much in broad spectrum. But the middle class has changed a lot in the last 50 years. And everyone used to be middle class. Now the middle class almost doesn't exist. It's like, what does that even mean anymore? Because I feel like if I'm not making 500,000 a year, I'm poor, right? At least in this part of the country. And I was looking at schools. We got a lot of private schools in the area, and I was looking at private schools a while ago, like many years ago, and I was realizing that you can make up to like close to 400,000, like 380,000 or some number like that, and you can qualify for financial aid at some private schools. 380,000. Are you serious? Like,
Well, the poverty level here in California, which again is an astronomically expensive place to live, is like you can earn over $100,000 for a family of four, and you're at the poverty level.
yeah, I mean that's really weird to think about. Like I grew up and it was like, wow, you made like I think my first job out of college, I started with $30,000. Like that was my first job salary. And you know what? I was one of the highest paid kids in the class. Like I don't mean New York like Goldman Sachs people. Yeah, I think they made like 80,000. There was like 40,000 plus a 40,000 bonus. It's like, wow, for Goldman Sachs, right out of college, like that's crazy. And I was making 30. I was one of the higher paid. I think in Boston, I was probably one of the highest paid. And it was crazy because it wasn't a lot. And I look back, I'm like, I could have negotiated a better salary for myself because some people got a little bit more. But I was like, it's fascinating to see how things have changed. And now, could you imagine making 30,000 coming out of college? You'd be living in your parents' house. Like you can't afford to live off that nowadays. And yet some people get that, right? And I remember also when I was when I was working, it was like maybe one year out of college. I was talking to my buddy, and we were single, just going out, having a good time. We didn't have any obligations, all that. And our thesis was if you made 75,000 in Boston at that time, you would have had a good life. You could have maxed out your 401k contributions. You could have been able to pay for whatever you need to pay, not an extravagant life, just an ordinary life that you went on 2 vacations a year and just, you didn't overspend, but you went out like you went out on the weekends and had a good time and overpaid for drinks in the Boston bars. Like 75,000 would have done that. Now, I don't even know what that number is. I mean, I don't know. In the economics have gotten so harsh. I mean, they talk about food prices going up 26% in the CPI. No, they haven't. They're up 100% for me since COVID. 100% easily. And that's not including shrinkflation, which obviously is a hidden tax. So you have all these dynamics, and if somebody is earning a pretty fixed income, how are they surviving? Like, how's the middle class even surviving? I don't know because my income's more flexible. I don't have a fixed salary, like my income fluctuates. But I just see all these people. I'm like, how are people surviving? I don't know. Like, what is going to crack the middle class? So, I guess the open question is, how should middle class people be looking at this? How should they be thinking about finances and how to structure things so they don't get under a big rock for the rest of their life?
I think there's major changes people have to think about if they're living to like try to live within their means and also save and invest. And sometimes they're really hard. In fact, most of the time they're really hard. When our daughter was born in 1988, my husband and I lived in San Diego. He had just finished a graduate degree, and I was working at the university, San Diego State University. He had 3 jobs. I had my regular job and then a side hustle. And we were like, our lives would be insane in San Diego, raising one child just to make ends meet. And we made a big decision. We said, we're leaving California. We're going to another part of the country where it's cheaper to live. Now, some people aren't willing to do that, or they can't do that, or whatever. But I think for us financially, we moved to a lower cost of living area. I was able to take some time off from work. We continued to fund our 401k to the max. And it was painful. It was painful. I remember we used to take a vacation in the summer to Canada because the exchange rate was so favorable that we could get a really nice vacation for like a 20% discount off of the US. So you have to be kind of savvy and you have to be deliberate. And we made a lot of sacrifices, which to me, they didn't cost much because of the things that were important to us. Having a family, spending time with our family, preparing for the future, so outweighed having a highly material life. And over the long term, those decisions were very smart. They were they can be very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all these things are really challenging. One thing I want to talk about the middle class is you talked about maxing out your 401k. People who are wealthy do this. People who are poor don't have enough money to do this, in large part. People in the middle class, it depends what you're doing. But investing is such an important aspect of the middle class experience if you want to survive. I'll give you an experience. So my dad, when I was growing up, my dad, he was a product of the Depression era. So he grew up in the Great Depression, and very few people alive have that experience. I heard about it all the time, so I feel like I lived it, even though I didn't. Where they had nothing, where his mom would be like, "Oh, I'm not hungry tonight. Why don't you have my hamburger?" So that he could have food. Like people would go hungry just to make sure their kids were fed. Like crazy stuff that we think of like, oh, that's not possible. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that happened. It was different. And they moved houses like every few months. Couldn't pay the rent. All right, we're gonna move again. We moved to a new house. We moved to a new house. Like I remember as a kid driving around, and he would drive around like the 3 local towns. He's like, oh, I used to live there in that house. He used to live there in that house. He used to live there. And he pointed out all the houses that he used to live in. And they didn't have any money. Like they were poor. And everyone was poor, I guess, in the Great Depression. But they were poor. They didn't have any money. So they just constantly bounced one house to the next to the next. And it was just really eye-opening to me. And then here's a guy who didn't trust anybody. He put money in the bank, but obviously only a certain amount because back then they didn't trust the banks. But cash was king. You didn't invest because you didn't know when things were going to fall apart, right? Save for a rainy day kind of thing. So he never invested and missed 2 great decades of stock market growth. And he could have been like extremely wealthy had he invested. And he never did. He just had it in CDs and plugging along at 5% or 6 or whatever it was. And he missed out on all that growth. And because of that, he never became wealthy. He was, like upper middle, as I say, the Caddyshack quote, I'm lower middle. I hope to be upper middle. I'll probably end up being middle. Yeah. But anyway, so he could have gotten a lot wealthier had he invested in the market, and he just never did. And it changed the outcome of his retirement because of that. And a lot of lost opportunities. And I think about that all the time because I think about like all the people who don't have the opportunity to invest. And the inflation is asset inflation. So everyone who's got an asset is getting wealthier. People who don't are getting poorer. So how does the middle class deal with this? What do you think, Phil? Like, there's a lot of smart, well-educated people in the middle class who just don't invest. Like, what should people be doing? What are some basic steps people can be doing?
So I like to think of it, pay yourself first. Take some money from your paycheck. Make sure if you work for a company and they give you a match on your 401k, at least do that. At least do that. Think about it. Like a basic match is if you put in 6%, you get 3% as your employer contribution. That's a 50% return on your money. No matter what the market does, you're getting 50% more is going in than you put in. So don't do that. Sometimes it could be better than that, might be a little bit worse, but do that. And like that's where you have to start. Take that money, take some money from your paycheck, direct it towards savings. Because if the money never hits your checking account, it's a lot harder to spend it. So put it into your 401k, make those automatic contributions to some type of savings, figure out where to cut, do what you can to live within your means. I mean, I'll even go like, I think about this all the time. I heard this story, like as parents, you want to help your kids, right? So we were talking about college. Another way you can help your kids is you can help them buy a house. But I never thought about this consequence to that. If you help your kids buy a house, now all of a sudden they're in a neighborhood that's probably above their means. So now they're going to look at all the people around them and what they have and what they're doing, and they're going to want that too. It's FOMO, right? And so what happens is you think you're helping your child out, but you're probably not helping them nearly as much as you think you are because now you're putting them into a situation where what they're going to want and what they're going to think that they should have are going to match where they live as opposed to what they can afford. So you want to think always about trying to make sure that you are aware of how much you're taking in and how much are you paying out so that you can make sure that you live within your means. It's hard. We have so many competing things, right? You want to, if you have a family, you want to do things with your family. If you have kids and you want to help them go to school, you have your house, you have to fund your retirement. There's lots of competing things. So you have to figure out. That's why I do life planning with people to help them figure out those things that are really important to them. And I like to think about it. We're not just trying to match our money and how we use it with our values, but how we use our time, how we use our energy, how we use our attention and our money. All four of those things. I call it our team of capital. How are we aligning that with our values? I think that's really important. It doesn't matter if you're poor, if you're middle class, or if you're upper class. Try and figure out those things that are really important to you. And that's where you want to allocate to there and spend your money in a way that aligns with your values as opposed to worrying about FOMO or worrying about the best of anything. Do what you can afford so that you don't end up in that situation where clients will say, my biggest fear is I don't want to eat cat food when I retire. So you have to prepare, and investing is such an important part of that because as Barb said, market returns 8 to 9% on average per year. If you put it into a few years ago, we were getting nothing for savings. Now we're getting 4 to 5% if you put it in a high yield account or a treasury, not if you put it in your regular bank, because they're probably still not paying you very much, if anything. But you got to be able to get growth. So let your money work for you. I remember when I was in college, I wanted to take a course in investment analysis, and I was in the business school, and the economics department offered that course in the I was portfolio theory. I'm sorry, in the economics department offered it, and the business school didn't, and it was new. The business school was new, and they didn't get along with the economics department, so they didn't let me take that course. And I went to my professor who was teaching investment analysis. I said, "Here I am in school, and I'm trying to get it, graduate so I can get a job. And I want to take a course that will help me take the money that I earn in that job and put it to work and make more money for me. And this school won't let me. I don't think that's fair." And he said, "You're absolutely right." And he gave me an independent study in portfolio theory. But the point being that you've got to put your money to work for you. You got to find a way to save something, because if you don't, you're always going to be behind. As you said, the asset inflation is huge. You need to be able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, that's great, Phil. I appreciate you sharing. Barb, what are your thoughts? What should people be thinking about?
Phil said it all. Really, I got nothing. I think he was right on the money, and I have a relative, and I remember back, 20, 30 years ago, who's making a lot more money than we were and jetting around and buying expensive things. And Bob and I would look at him and go, wow, that would be nice. Well, yeah, except he wasn't raised in an environment that valued investing. He didn't know anything about investing. He never invested. And long story short, 20, 30, 40 years later, we've invested all along, and now he's retired and he's like way behind. And so, if you haven't been exposed to investing, you need to read a book or two, even if it's foreign to you, and just get started. Like Phil said, go with your 401k, an IRA, a brokerage account, and just invest as much as you can. Get it out of your checking account into your investment account. And over time, you will be amazed at the growth. Short term, not so much. Long term, there's very little like it that can boost your wealth.
Great. So, all right. So we're gonna wrap it up here. So, Phil, final thoughts before we wrap this episode up.
So the last thing I'd like to add, just to follow on to the last point that Barb made, is start early. The sooner you can start, the better. If you ever, in one of my favorite books, if you're looking for a book about any of this stuff, Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's a great book. And he tells the story about, most of us know that Warren Buffett is one of the richest people in the world, right? And part of the reason is because he started so young. He started investing when he was like 10. Now he's 94. And if he only invested like the average person, if he started in his 20s, 30, and he went until he was 65, he would have so much less. Because think about it, if your money grows, and I'm just going to make it simple, at 5% a year, right? If you had $100 and it grows by 5%, that's $5. If you have $100,000, that's $5,000. If you had $1 million, that's 50,000. So the more you accumulate, as your money grows, you get growth on top of the growth. So it's so important to start early and take advantage of the benefit of compounding in time. That's a really important aspect as well. As for me, in my firm I work with, I know that experiencing big life transitions can be stressful, and my job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can download our free ebook, How to Flourish Through Life's Big Changes, at apprisewealth.com/ebook. And you can also sign up for our blog. Thanks for having me today, Kirk. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil. Appreciate your wisdom as always. And Barb, what about you? Final thoughts?
Turn off the noise. I got so much stuff in my shopping cart. It's unbelievable. Fortunately, I typically don't come back and buy it, but those ads are so compelling and those testimonials, and it's like, wow, my life could be amazing with this steam cleaner. And this new makeup's going to make me look 20 years younger. Well, think of all the things that are bombarding you every day to spend and try not to be persuaded. Don't look at your friends. Don't look at your TikTok account and everyone's doing better than you. They're not. And just create a plan. Live a life of saving and investing with a modicum of discipline. And over the long term, your future self will thank you. I'm Barbara Friedberg. You can find me online on YouTube and at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance. See you next time.
Great. Thanks for coming on, Barb.
That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead. And remember, no one will care about your money like you do. So invest in your life.